Welcome to Media That Made Us, the podcast about the art that set us on the path to becoming the people we are today. This week I'm joined by James Bigg, writer and podcaster. And we're here for a conversation about Neon Genesis Evangelion. And, well, because I'm a parody of myself, also Star Wars again somehow. So, join us, won't you?
So if he is not on a lap for a certain percentage of the day,
yeah,
it's just very upsetting. And, you know, with me, like, I'm the only person in the house. My mom's retired, so,
yeah,
like, she is, you know, on the couch at least a little more often than I am.
Sure, yeah.
Especially when my office is out here.
Mm-hmm.
But so, you know, I have to go to work and leave him in the house alone for hours at a time, and he's just not happy about it.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
His tendency is to just sort of stand near me in the house, staring at me and whining ever so softly. Just like, I don't know what you're asking me for, man. It's not time for me to sit on the couch. I have deeds I must perform.
We have one of our permanent dogs is a Great Pyr mix, Great Pyr German Shepherd and Australian Cattle Dog, and he's a big doof. He's super like clumsy and inattentive. He's got ADHD, I'm pretty sure. But he does get the thing where, like, if he's unhappy about something, he just like mourns. Like, he's just like makes this like low plaintive wail, and he's just looking at you, and I'm like, what do you want, man? Like, what is, like, I just fed you. You were just out, like. You're not going to the back door, so you don't want to go out. And it's like, you have water. Like, I just like played with you. Like, what do you want? He's just like, I'm bored. That's happened a lot less since we got the puppy who bugs the crap out of him. So, James, if someone was to ask, who is James? What do you hope the answer is?
Well, to crib from you a little bit, a guy I really like and also never perceive.
Okay, you just don't want to be. Do not see me.
Yeah, but also I want to be universally loved. So that's the the duality of man, the hedgehog's dilemma, if you will. Relevant to the topic. No, I'm kind of a writer, voice actor, occasional director, tabletop game enthusiast. My day job is much less exciting than any of those things. I do software QA, so.
Yeah. Who cares about day jobs, right? That's just the thing you do to live.
Yeah.
It's not the thing you do to survive. Not survive. Thrive. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
The thing you do to thrive.
Vocation, not an avocation.
Exactly. So, like, what kind of kid were you?
So I was, kind of a weird kid. Like, you know, big nerd, played D&D.
Yeah.
I was also a theater kid, but not like the outgoing and gregarious kind of theater kid.
Sure.
I was the kid for whom getting up on stage and pretending to be someone else for a few hours was a way to not have to worry about being me.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, if I'm continuously worried about whether people like me, I don't have to worry about whether anyone likes Captain Hook.
Right.
He just is who he is, and also I get immediate feedback in the form of audience applause. When I'm doing it right.
Yeah. That's an interesting take on the theater kid thing. Yeah, the sort of escape from yourself.
Yeah. I am the just like, or at least I try to be just the nicest person you could hope for. But you know, when I played Captain Hook in high school and I'm like stealing a teddy bear from the kids, and I just hear this single child saying no from the audience, and I just like no.
Yeah, it's the freedom to be like all of the parts of yourself that are there but aren't that you're not gonna foster. You're not going to bring out, but they are there, and you get to acknowledge them and use them in the context in which it's creating something. You're entertaining, so it's creating something good. With the things that you would otherwise not find useful.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So it sounds like Peter Pan was the big production that you remember, that you like lived when you go back into your theater kid soul.
I was in like 12 different shows in high school, but Peter Pan was like my big senior role.
Yeah.
Like that was they're actually like just going to move to a new theater building the next year. Like the school was being shut down and moving to a newer campus. And so it gave our theater teacher the ability to just like, okay, we're going to drill holes in shit and put in flying rigs, and no one can tell us no, because this building isn't going to be knocked down in use next year. Yeah. So
that's great.
So yeah, we kind of went all out on that, and I got to play after playing mostly like the dad or like, because I'm a fat kid in high school, like the parts that are open for me are not the heartthrob. I think like,
you also, I'm just guessing here, you look like the kind of kid who had maybe a little bit of a beard early.
I actually did not. This was all college.
Okay. Gotcha.
But just like kind of larger kid, kind of deeper voice.
Yeah.
My singing range is like a baritone, so I can't hit those like
yeah.
leading man tenor highs.
Yeah. The stereotyping of the voice type is always fun with that one.
Yeah, it's always just kind of weird that like, everyone who's a good person has higher voices. And
and I wonder how much of that is some sort of is a sort of universalish thing, or if it's something that was built out of that operatic culture that came out of out of Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, where like how much of it is taught versus how much of it is like the sort of not universal, but sort of more broadly appropriate. I'd love to know other cultures if they have the same sort of biases that we do in that regard.
Yeah, would be interesting to look into. I have no idea, but yeah,
me either. It was just one of those idle thoughts. Like, have you heard about by the way, we have a broad structure and a topic we're going to talk about, but if we just have other things we want to mention, just feel free.
Yeah.
Have you heard about the Kiki and Booba experiment?
Yeah.
For the audience, it's once was thought to be universal. It's now thought to be maybe a little bit less so, but it's these two images. One of it's kind of this blobby, it looks like the Nickelodeon logo. It's like a blob with little round bits sticking out. And the other one is like a sharp polygon. They both have 7 points. And the question is, which one of these is Kiki and which one of them is Booba? And almost universally, it's Booba is the round one and Kiki is the one with the sharp points. And it's not broadly tied to culture, not broadly tied to language. It's surprisingly something that seems to be built into human brains, at least a bit.
Yeah. And like my own theories about that have in like things to do with like things that are pointy tend to make kind of sort of sounds. Yeah, exactly. Whereas Booba kind of like more of a bubbling brook water sort of.
Yeah. Or it's like it visually kind of ties the idea to like softness or like something that would make a kind of noise, like it. Yeah. There is a broad, like a not strong, but there is some correlation between sort of onomatopoeic peak noises being used for objects and animals and stuff. That if you ever want to have a fascinating time, look up what other languages say animals say, like what the words they use for what like a pig says, what a chicken says. It's delightful.
Because they're all like right. They're just very different.
Yeah. It's like, I can see that in there, Also, it reminds me of the oldest cat breed being the Egyptian Mao. And it's like, you can just imagine somebody walk. Meow. Yeah, you walk up, you're like, "What are you?" And the cat goes, "Meow," and you go, "Okay, that's what you are."
Check.
Yes. So, whereabouts did you grow up?
Pacific Northwest, kind of Portland area.
Suburb kid or
suburb? Like we're right on the edge of like the suburb and the rural area, but I went to a suburban like high school.
Sure.
One of the it's funny. It's like the building that I went to high school in, the new building was built in the 1970s.
Okay. Yeah.
Like the old building was a WPA project.
Yeah.
It's funny. The series Leverage, I think you might be familiar with it.
Yeah, I know Leverage.
There is an episode that was filmed in my high school.
Cool.
The like class reunion episode where they steal a tech magnate's password at his high school reunion. Like, that's my high school. Like, that nice. Gym that they set it in is right behind the stage in the theater. So that was our backstage area. Uh-huh. So I have run, in my underpants across that room at least once, trying to get to a costume change.
Yeah. So just out of curiosity, when you strike me as sort of the kids on bikes era, for lack of a better term, before the look, just judging by like that era when before everything got completely overrun by the internet. Is that right?
Yeah. The internet was kind of a thing when I was in high school.
But,
I graduated in the early 2000s, so I think we're kind of an age.
No, that's actually right. Okay, it's the Oregon Trail generation then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like,
okay, so okay.
Oh, just like I was a bit too far out to be kind of gang of kids on bikes roving around. Just
sure, yeah.
Houses a little too far apart to make that feasible, but I rode my bike to friends' houses. I rode my bike to the library, but it wasn't that like kids would run around.
Sure, yeah, and if your area was anything like mine, it was like the moment that you had a motorized vehicle, your world opened up.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. The structure of the town just built around people having cars. So the moment that you finally got one, you're like, oh, thank God. So how did you find anime?
I've been watching anime for a long. I think so. The first stuff I think I watched was on TV. Like, sure. It was one of the local stations like ran Sailor Moon at like 5:30 in the morning. Okay. So I would get up and like get ready for school and watch Sailor Moon. I did not watch enough of it to have a coherent idea of what the plot of Sailor Moon is, but
yeah, I think with that early dub that there was you were never going to.
Yeah,
like, just judging. And like,
didn't catch every episode as they were airing it anyway, so it was just sort of people doing stuff. There's that, and in high school, I don't remember whether I first watched Neon Genesis Evangelion in high school or college. The stuff I remember watching in high school was Cowboy Bebop and Trigun, and the WB redub of Cardcaptor Sakura, the Card Captors.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, it was just something that I watched with friends, and I don't remember which of us, who of us went to the Suncoast and bought the DVDs of.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Various things, but yeah.
So it sounds like, just judging by what you've said, that then Neon Genesis Evangelion would have been like almost your first mecha anime. You didn't mention.
It probably was. I did not watch. I still have not watched a lot of Gundam. Or
Macross is the other big one.
Yeah, Macross.
If you weren't an anime kid, then it is Robotech. That's the Americanized name.
So I didn't watch Robotech. The one other thing that I can remember that was in that category, I don't know if you're familiar with the Starship Troopers 3D animated series.
Oh my God, someone else!
The Rajex Roughnecks, but that was in the same early morning block as Sailor Moon.
Okay, I wonder. You said that was a local. Because here's the thing: I very distinctly remember getting up early every day to watch the Roughnecks, the Starship Troopers Chronicles.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I'm sorry. We're just to derail us. Okay. Okay. That is one of those shows that inexplicably lives in my brain like a kraken. Had you read Starship Troopers before you came across that, or was that your introduction?
I had, yeah.
Okay.
And I remember specifically thinking that compared to the Starship Troopers movie, this actually had the mech suits that they talk about having in the book.
Yes. It's a fascinating artifact because what happened was they made, the book had been out since the 50s, I think.
Yeah.
And they made the movie. The movie it's not a Starship Troopers movie. Like, it's called Starship Troopers, but the director wrote the script essentially, had the story idea, had done a bunch of production design, and then the studio came in and said, "Hey, we own the movie rights to this old book. Let's make it. Let's do the thing and make this your the story that you're already working on." And he was like, Paul Verhoeven was like, "Sure, whatever." And he just slapped a bunch of the names on, and the scriptwriter he was working on drew in some of the stuff, but it wasn't something that he particularly cared about. So it is.
Sure.
It's not like the book. It's just not like there's some stuff pulled over. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it's just, but
the politics are a lot better in the movie for one thing. Or at least it is the things that are portrayed as being good in the book are portrayed as being kind of over the top.
Yeah. There's a big discussion I have brewing in me about the book, because I don't think it's nearly as positive as everybody else does. I think but anyway. Anyway, back to Roughnecks. Roughnecks, they then made after the movie, which is this 3D animated sort of for kids. Like, it was ostensibly for kids because it's animated, but it wasn't. This isn't Biker Mice from Mars. This isn't Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. This was like they were trying to have a plot. They were actually trying to tell a war story, and they split the difference between the book and the movie. So like they had a bunch of stuff that was straight up from the movie. Dizzy Flores is still a woman. The bugs are the models they got from ILM, like all of that stuff. But they also pull in a bunch of stuff, including setting elements and the armor and alien species and like all of this stuff from the books. From the book, excuse me, is a fascinating artifact. I can't necessarily recommend it, but it is really interesting to me.
Yeah, so that was probably my first animated like mecha series.
Sure, yeah.
That I watched. But other than that, it was kind of that, and then Ava at some point. And like I say, I can't remember exactly when I watched it first.
Sure, yeah. That's interesting because Ava is such a deconstruction of that of the tropes of the mecha anime world. So it's always interesting when somebody comes into a property that is deconstructing these things as their entry point to that. It's almost as if you had never read a comic book before, and then you watch or read Watchmen by Alan Moore. And it's like that would be such an interesting thing to be your first take of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, this is not the first time that's happened to me. Like the Magical Girl series that I first watched all the way through was Madoka Magica. So like,
good point.
I really like to. I somehow have managed to fall upon liking deconstructions of things that I'm not super familiar with the thing they're deconstructing. But
yeah. Okay, so for those of the people in the audience who maybe haven't experienced Neon Genesis Evangelion, can you give us like that 10,000 foot view of what that is?
Sure. So, they're kind of three parts of Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Only three? Okay.
Well, there are three main parts and then a bunch of stuff that I haven't gotten deep into because
Gotcha.
It just hasn't been my thing. Like I'm talking strictly about kind of the show and then the movies. Disregarding all of the different mangas and video games
and multiple movie series now, as I understand.
Yes. So it
got complex. Yeah.
There is Neon Genesis Evangelion, which was the kind of 26 episode series that first aired in Japan in like October of 1995.
Gotcha.
And then there is the movie End of Evangelion, which is an alternate version of the last two episodes of the series.
Yes.
That ends the series in a different way than the last two episodes do. And then there is the rebuild of Evangelion.
Yeah.
Which is the kind of new movie series that started in 2007 and the last one just came out in 2001. And so that's kind of the production side of the what is it? The kind of the plot summary, if you will, is it's about a teenage boy named Shinji Ikari who, after having been abandoned by his father at somewhere, it's not ever gone into exactly what his living situation was before, has been called back to where his father works in the city of Tokyo 3 at the secret government organization called NERV, and discovers that his father is the director of a program that has created an artificial humanoid weapon known as Evangelion.
Big old robot.
And he is called in, run underground, and told, you're going to pilot this thing.
Yeah.
And because humanity is under attack from these mysterious alien entities known as angels.
Yes.
So he and two other in the original series, we'll get to the differences later. But two other pilots, young women named Rei Ayanami and Asuka Langley Shoryu in the original series.
Mm-hmm.
Her name changes later in the rebuild.
Sure.
But pilot these giant mechs against strange aliens that have come to kick off an event known as the Third Impact.
Sure. Okay.
Which will, if they are allowed to reach their goal, will wipe out all life on planet Earth.
It's interesting because from that description, it sounds like just a mecha anime, right?
Yes.
Like like that's the description that would show up. It wouldn't be that much different for something like Macross, kind of, you know.
Yeah.
But like the tone of Evangelion is very different.
Yes, and it only gets more so as the series continues, because it's not as much as the plot is about them fighting angels, it's not about them fighting angels. It's about their mental and emotional states and what it means to them to pilot the Eva and, what... Nope, I don't know where that sentence is gone. It just went away.
Well, if every other... Because the trope of let's grab a small kid and put him in a giant robot and have him fight aliens... pretty common, right?
Yes.
Or other kids.
The other kids in the other robot suits.
And the starting point for Evangelion is somebody going, isn't that a bit fucked up?
Yeah.
Like, that's probably a bit fucked up. It would probably be really bad if we did that.
Yeah, that would be incredibly traumatic, actually.
Yeah. That would like cause a lot of trouble, and like it would really hurt these children. Hey, let's make a whole anime series about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the director and lead writer, Hideaki Anno, has specifically said that it's, it is about deconstructing the mecha anime genre, and it's about, he specifically said he wanted to write a series about not running away from your problems.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of one of the central conflicts for Shinji is either running away and not piloting the Eva anymore, or standing his ground and helping everyone. And
and so I'm trying to think here. As an aside, I'm absolutely fascinated when Japanese culture specifically, they're the ones who tend to do this, is their treatment of Christianity and Christian symbolism is the only way an American can feel like what it is like to have their culture appropriated.
Yes.
Just about. It is, and I personally love it. I think it's fascinating to see another culture take the symbols and ideas that are so woven into the iconography of our culture and just be like, no, we don't treat these with respect at all. Wouldn't it be cool if...
Yeah, all of the fucking explosions are going to be shaped like crosses, because...
Yep.
That's... and these angels, as predicted in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they're all going to be, basically biblically accurate angels with eyes all over and shit.
Yeah.
And then...
Yep.
Yeah, and then... Yeah, the thing they can't be allowed to reach is a giant crucified form with a spear through its chest... That we are definitely just calling the Lance of Longinus.
Yeah, because that sounds good.
In direct reference to the spear that pierced Christ's side in the Bible.
Yeah, and even though the character that they're talking about is, I think isn't that the one they call Eve?
It is. Yeah, alternately,
it's been a while.
It is technically not Eve, but it is referred to as Eve in the series until until one of the angels finally gets there and says, "Wait a minute, this is Lilith."
Okay, God, yeah, that is a very, yeah. You can imagine the writer being like, "Oh yeah, this is perfect. It's a big reveal." I love it. Yeah, I think as a little bit of context for where I am on it, this is not my big anime series. I am remembering the one time that I watched it, probably in 2002 or 3 when it was shown to me by a friend. And I fell asleep through the last 2 episodes because they are honestly quite boring. If you're not really if you're not into the whole like psychological drama of it all, the original anime ends on a pretty what's the word? Not bombastic state. It is a pretty slow thing. I think because they ran out of money to
so there's
animation.
There's some truth to that and some not.
Yeah.
And like part of what really interests me about what I continue to find interesting about the series is this kind of this meta narrative that exists around it.
Oh yeah.
Because if you learn about the process of its creation, like it's kind of mirrored in the series itself.
Sure. Okay.
So like, it is like a lot of the series is about the fact that Shinji hates himself.
Yes.
And is pretty deeply depressed.
Yeah.
And that is at least in part because Hideaki Anno was deeply depressed during the creation of the series.
Yeah.
And
if I recall, even in interviews, he said that that's one of the reasons why the Rebuild series works the way it does is because he is a different person now. So he just can't make the same thing again, which is actually a pretty enlightened perspective to take on your own work. You're like, if you asked me to go back and make something that I made when I was, 20 years younger, of course it's going to be different. I'm a different person now, and it comes from me. It's actually actually kind of really lovely way to talk about it. I'm sure that is not necessarily universally received among fans who hate it when you change their things.
Yes. That's also kind of part and parcel of the story of Evangelion.
Sure. It's almost, I mean, like this isn't the series that I love as dearly as other people do, but it is impossible to understate how big of a cultural phenomenon Evangelion is.
Absolutely.
Especially in Japan, where like the only reason why I know this is because I saw YouTube videos where somebody was like, "Hey, can I go through an entire day using just Evangelion merch for everything in my life?" And they do. Like they have everything from the sheets and bed that they wake up in to the food they eat that day to the toothbrush they use at night, the clothes they wear. It's all Evangelion branded. And it's like, okay, yeah, that is something that has done a lot in that culture.
Yeah,
to have like that far.
It is not true that every Japanese person watches anime. Like,
no,
but
no.
Evangelion is one of the series that broke out into kind of mainstream culture.
Yep.
In a way that just most series don't. It's people know stuff about Evangelion even if they're not big anime people.
Yeah. It's weird because we don't have. I'm not sure we have I guess the closest thing actually would be Marvel here in the US,
probably.
where like because like you could really easily, and lots of people do draw the parallel between Disney and Ghibli, where like these are things that had broken out and gotten mainstream success beyond their original target demographic. And like here in the US, I guess the closest thing is Marvel. Though Marvel is a juggernaut, I think, in a way that maybe Evangelion isn't.
Yeah,
but,
Marvel, maybe Star Wars.
Star Wars is good. It's a good point where like everybody's seen it.
Yeah, or even if they haven't seen it, like they know lines from it.
They know lines from it and stuff. They can recognize the characters.
Who Darth Vader is.
That's actually a much better parallel. You're right.
But yeah, so like Anno was deeply depressed during the creation of the series, and he like started kind of getting better as the series went on. Like he was talking to people. He was kind of coming out of this major depressive episode, and so the finale is like the kind of climax of the series is Shinji Ikari in this kind of weird psychodrama at the end of the series, like figuring out that, just because I think everyone hates me, that's what's in my brain, but it's not necessarily what's in theirs.
Right.
And, I won't, if I open up to other people, I could discover that in fact, maybe they don't hate me. And like,
yeah,
you know, that is in part because that's kind of how Anno was coming to terms with himself at the time. So like the ending is the way it is in part because it was always intended to be like, the series was always intended to focus on the psychology of the characters, and the fact that everything else falls away at the end and it's just their psychology is intentional. It is also because they were running short on money and therefore people. And it's also because they ran short on time, because Anno didn't know how the series was going to end basically until they got there.
It's definitely one of those things where that sounds like if they had been given more time and money, you know, say they had an infinitely understanding studio behind them, which, you know, business ventures never are. But they said, okay, you can have another 6 months and another $2 million or whatever. That it would still, the themes would still be the same. It just, they might have approached it in a slightly different practical sense.
It
wasn't like there was a giant mecha battle that was going to end the series planned, and they said, no, we don't have money for it. It was just that, like, well, let's have a 17-minute conversation in an elevator. That's really easy to animate, but also that approaches the things that we were trying to do anyway.
Yeah. Let's, you know, these kind of weird sequences with like characters repeating the same action as they say different things are, you know, they work in a kind of dreamlike way, and also we only have to animate like 5 frames of animation and just play them over and over again. So that's kind of how the series ended, and you know, some people got it, liked it. A lot of the fans really fucking hated it.
I remember. Yes, I was there in the mid 2000s when it hit, when that was bubbling around the internet.
And like, you know, sent hate mail to the studio, hated it. Like, they got emails and mail that were just awful. Like,
nothing worse than a fan who's scorned, a fan who doesn't like everything but the end, or likes everything but the end.
And so, like, for Anno, who's, you know, just kind of coming to terms with his depression through the creation of the series, then getting fucking hate mail about his, you know, main character who comes to terms with his, like, why weren't there more mech fights? Why wasn't there any fan service? You know, was devastating and kind of drove him back into depression. And so then they made End of Evangelion. Like, the studio has been very clear to say that End of Evangelion was not a deliberate fuck you to toxic fans of the series, but it kind of reads that way. So like, it came out in 1997. There is also technically a previous release called Death and Rebirth, which was a clip, like an hour-long clip show of stuff from the series, and then the first 30 minutes of End of Evangelion.
Interesting.
But then End of Evangelion fully released in 1997, and it is, in some sense, like the external events that we didn't see at the end of the series, as opposed to the internal kind of psychodrama that we got in the series. And like, it is, you know, it kind of gives the toxic fans everything they asked for. You know, there's big mech fights. There's like Sela, the organization behind Nerve, drops a dozen weird mechs on Nerve HQ, and Asuka has to fight them all with a 5-minute timer because that's how long the batteries in an Eva last. And, you know, there's more of the like pseudo-Gnostic mysticism shit. Shit flies into the air and forms like the Kabbalah tree of life, and, you know, everyone gets turned into orange soda as their bodies, their consciences merge into one. And like, none of it fucking matters. Like, the big robot fight doesn't do anything. Because at the end of it, like, the mech shuts down. I mean, spoilers, I guess.
I think
the premise of the series.
Frankly, at this point, if you want to remain unspoiled, just leave. We'll talk about stuff at this point. We already have, so you've already been screwed. But like, we're not going to respect a 20-year-old series at this point. That's one of the most that's like the most popular anime that has ever existed. Sorry.
Yeah. It's just like, if you're not spoiled at this point, I'm shocked.
Yeah. Vader was Luke's dad, by the way. I mean, like, it's okay.
So like there's this big mech fight that's really spectacular, and then her mech shuts off and all of the mechs she killed come back to life and they kill her. Like,
oh yeah.
And then they go on to do what they were going to do anyway.
Yeah.
Like all of this weird shit happens, and like instead of like among the weird kind of psychodrama that still exists in that movie, like shots of an empty, like video shots of an empty theater, and overlaid with flashes of like emails and graffiti that were not actually things received by the studio, but were based on things received by the studio.
Yeah.
Including like death threats to Anno himself.
Yeah.
And like at the end of the movie, the kind of resolution, instead of coming to accept himself and letting other people in, Shinji rejects connection with other people.
Gotcha.
And so he winds up alone on a beach with Asuka, who he immediately attempts to strangle.
Oh, great. Mm.
And like she calls him disgusting, or says, "I feel sick" in Japanese, I think is the direct translation.
Sure.
And that's the end of the movie. It's just like, fine, here's what you fucking wanted, you fucking pigs. I hope you choke on it. Is what the studio says the movie is not about. But
yeah, I could definitely see how it might be read that way.
Yeah. And like, I think there is a quote saying that they intended to kill Evangelion with this movie.
Sure. Yeah.
They wanted to never make Evangelion ever again.
Yeah. Fair enough, man. Like, just because people want it doesn't mean you are responsible for giving it to them. Yeah.
And then, 10 years go by and a whole bunch of other Evangelion shit gets produced, but none of it kind of with the direct involvement of Anno or
the kind of stuff that gets made when the director isn't interested, but the studio still owns the IP.
Yes.
I bet. Yeah.
And so, you get a ton of, I think there are a bunch of different mangas, including one that is literally based on like a 3-minute segment from the finale where they are just like in a School Days anime. And like
the coffee shop AU version of just like we're going to actually make that as an anime.
Yeah, basically, yes. Like Asuka running down the street, or no, I'm sorry, Rei running down the street with a piece of toast in her mouth, running into Shinji. Like, Evangelion Unit 1 is somehow one of their classmates. It's very strange.
I have actually kind of a lot of respect for whoever made that, because just like saying like, there's no way this isn't going to be weird, and just leaning into it, that's actually really cool.
Yeah, like, fair. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that it's good or not, but like, I respect the people who did it.
Yeah.
Nonetheless. Yeah.
But then in production starting in like 2004, I think, but coming out in 2007 was the first of the Rebuild movies.
Mm-hmm.
And the Rebuilds are a 4-movie series which start in the same place as the series does.
Yeah.
And rapidly go somewhere very different.
Yeah.
So the first movie, which came out in 2007, is almost like, in some places it is a line for line, shot for shot remake of the first 6 episodes of the show.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it follows the plot pretty strongly. There are minor differences. Certain things are introduced earlier. There is no double cross about Eve/Lilith in the Rebuild series, but like Lilith is revealed to be a thing in the first movie, which wasn't shown on screen until halfway through the series.
Yeah.
But then the second movie, which the first movie is the English title is like Evangelion 1.0 You Are Not Alone, with the not in parentheses. The second movie, You Cannot Advance, comes out in June 2009, and it starts to like deviate wildly from the plot of the series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To the point that the kind of climactic events of the series start happening much earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And like and then 3.0, which came out in 2012, like is wildly different than anything shown in the series.
Yeah. Interesting.
The first scene is literally in space.
Yeah.
With like them trying to deorbit the coffin that Unit 1 was put into sometime between the end of the last movie and now. It takes a massive time jump because Shinji is not awake for the kind of big events of the end of the second movie. And then much later, the final movie 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time.
Okay, sorry, as an aside, I love this. Those titles fucking whip. They're so strangely, just ever so slightly off. I adore it.
Yeah, and it's like they're much different than what the Japanese title. They're not a direct translation of the Japanese title at all. They are an English title created by the studio.
That's fantastic.
To grab some of the same vibe as the Japanese title, but like the like numbering in the Japanese series, you have to like understand things about No Theater to get why they're called.
Gotcha. Yeah. It's one of those things where like it's like trying to translate poetry, where like, you know, prose is one thing, dialogue's another thing, but like trying to get the vibe of like of a piece of language that wasn't really meant literally and has a bunch of layers to it and is really well crafted is really, really hard. And so sometimes it's just a matter of like, no, let's just start over and do something different that gets the same effect or a similar effect, something close enough to what we actually want to do. That's great.
Yeah. So that came out in 2021, like fully 9 years after the previous movie.
Yeah.
Because of a lot of things, including a global pandemic.
Sure. Yeah.
And it is like, it kind of combines the like deep introspection of the series with some of the kind of more out there elements of Evangelion. And like,
yeah, it definitely reads from what you're talking about, like not a reboot as much as a second draft in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and so one of the things that the movies strongly imply, but never state outright, is that all of these things happened. The original series and End of Evangelion and the rebuild are all different ways this played out in like a cycle of death and rebirth.
Yeah. Okay.
And the rebuild series is actually like the ending of it is about breaking that cycle.
Okay.
And it's a lot more about not just Shinji, but Shinji coming to understand his father and understand the people around him and not just focusing on what he wants, but on learning to give other people what they want.
Okay.
And so there is like an extended sequence where Shinji in Evangelion Unit 1 and his father in Evangelion Unit 13 fight across a landscape that gets increasingly more like strange and referential. Like they start in a cityscape fighting each other, and they're like knocking buildings away in the way that buildings do not get knocked away when they get hit. And then Shinji is knocked back through the back row of buildings and into the backdrop because this is happening on a soundstage.
Right.
We have to remember, this is an animated movie. This soundstage doesn't exist.
God, it's probably not true, but I so hope deep in my heart that that's actually a Mel Brooks reference in History of the World Part 1, where they break through the back part of the set and then they end up in like a show tunes dance hall. It's
yeah. So and that happens, and then they end up like fighting in mechs in the human-sized sets.
Yeah.
Where suddenly the mechs are just person-sized, and so they're fighting in Misato's apartment. They're fighting in gosh, I can't remember, but
that's fine. Yeah.
And then that scene culminates in Gendo saying like, we're evenly matched and this is not a conflict that can be resolved by violence.
Okay.
and Shinji putting down his spear and just like saying, I want to understand you. And going into why Gendo has set all of this weird shit up in his chess master being. And like, you know, it's like throughout the entire course of the thing, his whole goal has been trying to reunite with his dead wife.
Right.
Which is why he's trying to manipulate all of this stuff to bring about events in such a way as to be reunited with his wife.
Gotcha.
And so we learn about how he was just as weird a kid as Shinji is. And how, you know, until he met Yui, he was disconnected from people and didn't know anyone. And she opened up his heart, and then she died working on the Evangelion project. And it broke him a little.
Right.
And so the end of the whole thing is just Shinji coming to terms with how his father is just like him, and how his father has not been awful to him out of spite, but because he thought he was going to be a bad father.
Right.
And
right. The realization that because there's two, I know there's the common thing in psychology is like the idea that like at some point you realize your parents are just human. And it's like, there's two versions of that. One is where like the hero that you thought your parents were, well, they're just people and therefore are fallible. And there's the other version of it for people who maybe didn't have such great parents, where it's like, oh no, the monster that I thought they were is the result of all of the shit they went through. And that's just because they reacted to it in a human way as well.
So yeah, and it's, it becomes this extended, there's this extended sequence of just trying to understand Gendo and finally just sort of setting him aside.
Yeah.
And trying to understand Asuka and getting her what she needs. And, and you know, the final moment of the final decision that Shinji makes is not to try and go back and do it again, as it has been implied he has done many times before, but to just change the world as it is now so there aren't Evas in it anymore, and end the conflict, not by trying to win it, but just by deciding that this isn't something we need to fight. People can make their way from here.
Yeah. Because I'm fascinated because this is the first. It sounds like you would have watched it early 2000s. You obviously have kept up with at least the Rebuild series since then.
And
this is this 20-year series for you, right?
I mean, more or less. It's there's kind of a big gap in the middle there. I kind of got back into it when it re-released on Netflix in 2019.
Sure. But like that means that your relationship with Evangelion spans quite a large portion of you know the person you were when you first watched it and the person you are now today is probably significantly different as it would be for most people. Do you remember what it was that drew you into when you watched it that first time? I know you don't say exactly remember when it was, but do you remember sort of the vibes from back then?
I mean, I think that as a late teen, early 20s person who, as it turns out, was also dealing with undiagnosed depression. Like finding this kid who kind of hates himself and learns not to, pretty relatable.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. And then do you feel like you have a different perspective on the original series now? Or do you still feel like, you know, it's hard to divorce that from your initial impressions? Like
it's definitely something I still like. I understand that that's what it was now. If that makes sense, that like, cause I didn't realize that was why I was identifying with this character. And, you know, looking back, I can recognize, Shinji was kind of a piece of shit to other people in this series. And like, I won't entirely say I was that different when I you know, I have also come to realize that there are people that I've not been a good person to. And, you know, as a teenager and a 20 something.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think anybody who looks back at their past self and says, "Oh yeah, no, I was totally cool and I did all the things right," so they're not looking at themselves hard enough.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect, and you will fuck things up in incredibly terrible ways to people that didn't deserve it. And learning to live with that is important. And yeah, and it sounds like that's one of the themes that comes back as well.
Yeah.
The idea that like you have to learn how to forgive both people in your past and then also yourself for these kinds of things.
Yeah. And to not try and dwell on it or try and think about how you could have fixed it, but to move forward from that point.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I vibe with that pretty strongly as an adult who is,
I get you. Yeah.
You know, come to understand that about myself in the same way that the series kind of changes. And, you know,
it's really interesting. It's the wrong word. It's remarkable when series like that can grow up with the people who watch them. There's a lot of talk about, sorry to bring up Harry Potter, but there was a lot of talk about Harry Potter growing up with its audience, which I don't think actually it did super well. I think that it aged, but didn't grow up is maybe the way I'd put it.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas your description of Evangelion is one where in a lot of ways it did grow up. Like it already started, it was coming out of as a reaction out of that mecha anime, which was it's not the shallowest genre of action media that exists.
Sure, but
it was definitely not. Yeah, it's definitely not a hugely introspective kind of media.
There was definitely a whole lot of just like, we're in giant robots and it's super cool.
Yeah, there absolutely was. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's definitely, you know, often the very first stage of a genre. And then it sounds like the first version, the first instantiation of Evangelion was definitely a reaction to that. And then further out from that, more and more it was a reaction to itself. And being a reaction to yourself, to look back at the past version of you and go, oh, that I didn't get that right. I need to rewrite that. I need to change that. I need to look at the consequences of the decisions that were made before and see how those could either play out differently or how I could make up for them. Like really like look with a critical eye at a previous version of either the media or yourself, and then take a new stab at it and try to do things better. That's more like growing up. Rather than just getting darker and grittier.
And you know, there is also a certain amount of, as you were talking about, how you know, the ending would have been different if they had unlimited time and budget. And in some sense, the movies are also that.
Yeah,
because,
for sure.
I mean, they literally took 10 years and a massive amount of money to create the final movie in the series. But it is definitely in conversation with the previous version of itself. And
which is really cool. That's to watch a piece of media that kind of isn't in conversation with itself, but has been running for a really long time is kind of depressing. I haven't seen The Simpsons in a long time, but I have been watching the last few years of Bob's Burgers, and I'm like, I can see the trajectory, for example, of like, ooh, this is a sitcom that isn't allowed to build. Like it isn't
something different.
It's not. Yeah, it's not forced to change because they can keep animating these characters to be the same age forever. So they're not forcing anybody to grow. And the longer that goes on, the more it becomes a commentary. There is a, I'm going to break. There is a particular couch gag it's the only piece of Simpsons media I've seen in the last 20 years.
Talking about the Don Hartzfeldt one?
The one about time.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay.
I've seen that, and there was a really good YouTube video by Jacob Geller, I think.
That's the one I'm thinking of too. Yes.
Yeah. 100%.
Jacob Geller is one of my favorite YouTube guys at the moment.
He's great.
He's amazing. Okay. For the audience, since James and I are on the same page, we'll fill you guys in. Is the guy who made the viral video "My Spoon Is Too Big" was hired to do a couch gag for the Simpsons, and if I remember correctly, was basically told, do what you want, like it's fine. You have this amount of money and you have this amount of time.
We know that you have a certain style, and we're hiring you for that. So
we're hiring you to make a thing. We're not going to tell you what to do. And so he made what starts as like in present day Simpsons, and then I think the gag is that Homer finds a weird remote that has a fast forward button on it, and like the movie Click, fast forward, but doesn't just go to the end of his own life. He goes all the way through the end of time.
Yeah,
and then the Simpsons have changed and are strange and weird, and then he flashes back to some of the previous iterations, and it is a meditation. I hate the use of that term, but it is 100% a piece of media obsessed with the idea that The Simpsons could go on forever. It could go on forever, and these characters will probably not, they will change, but they won't grow in the same way necessarily. And what does that mean? And what would it be like to live in that state? And it's really good. It's like I said, it's the only piece of Simpsons media I've seen in the last 20 years, and it's great. And I would also highly, highly, highly recommend the Jacob Geller video on it. I'm going to link that in the description if I can remember.
The image of, I think it's Lisa as just sort of a disembodied pseudo head thing, just saying, I am Simpson over and over again is deeply haunting.
Yeah. And then since I'm going to look to the Jacob Geller video, he has an entire like feature length or multiple feature length thing based off of the same ideas that he was obviously just like talking about a creator who's like swirling over an idea as they work through multiple things. He was absolutely interested in this. It's very cool.
Yeah.
But seems directly relevant to what we've been talking about with to talk by comparison, a series that has developed and actually grown over time as it reacted to itself is very cool.
Yeah. The kind of one comparison that I've drawn like between the Rebuild, like growing as a series, and something else is the Star Wars sequels.
Oh yeah. Talk about not being in conversation with yourself.
Because episode 7 is more or less a reboot of episode 4. Like the characters are different. And
it's like if as you described the Evangelion, the remake Evangelions are like a second draft. The episode 7 of Star Wars feels like fan fiction. Or like a reskin almost.
It's episode 4 with the serial numbers filed off, and the characters renamed, and
in a way, it's because it's so funny. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what I've thought about there is that like you kind of need to do that. Like there hasn't been a new Star Wars movie in 15 years.
Yeah.
And like it in some sense you need a movie that's going to take things and say this is what a Star Wars. This is what the start of a Star Wars trilogy looks like.
Yeah.
And so it has a lot of the same bones as episode 4.
Yeah.
But then The Last Jedi starts to be a deconstruction of Star Wars. It starts to take things to a kind of a more interesting place and tries to grow as a movie.
Yeah.
And saying that, bloodlines aren't important. Everyone can be a Jedi.
Your heroes are going to die.
Anyone can be a Jedi. Your heroes are going to die. Sometimes you can't convince the bad guy to change sides.
Yeah.
And sometimes fighting isn't the answer.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you don't stand up to evil. Mm-hmm. And then episode 9.
It's so interesting because I agree with you that coming back with serial numbers filed off, let's return to the ground or return to the origin, right? Mm-hmm. And specifically choosing A New Hope, saying we're going back to the one that everybody kind of agrees is the good one. It's like not necessarily the best, but it is like the heart. It's the point of origin.
Like, A New Hope is Star Wars.
Yeah. You can't get more Star Wars than A New Hope. And in that way, episode 7 is absolutely a reaction to or repudiation of the prequel trilogy, which is, I was there when that shit came out, man. I still hold some anger in my heart, despite the fact those movies have, and especially the television shows have experienced a revival over the last few years. The kids who grew up with them now adore them. But I was there when I was already an adult when they came around, or not, I was late teens or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was like, man, that was, I can see why you would see the reaction to that and say, okay, we just need to make A New Hope again.
Yeah.
But there is something that also has to do, which is communicate what the next movie is. And I think that J.J. Abrams really failed in that. And the reason he failed, of course, is because he had no fucking clue what Rian Johnson was going to do. He had no idea. He didn't know.
Yeah.
He was hired to bring in one movie, and he didn't know what the next one was. And so he didn't set that up at all. There was no indication that we were going to be deconstructing. And so as much as I love... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just like... And like to some degree that makes sense if you're cribbing off of A New Hope, because A New Hope was not necessarily intended to be the start of a trilogy.
Yeah. But at least that was made... I mean, like George Lucas has often said that he had 9 movies planned from the beginning. That is not necessarily true, but it is also not completely untrue. He had a ton of ideas laid out in a big... I'm assuming on a giant cardboard or a giant pegboard with red string. And he had like, volumes and volumes of Ralph McQuarrie drawings to pull from. And he had all this stuff he'd written things out, and he had characters and things that he'd thrown away. And he had all of these bones there that he could then assemble into an idea. So that starting off from like, okay, we're going to make one movie, but I have material that I can make other movies of is different than I have 9 movies planned. But it's also very different from, let's make a movie. What's at the end of the movie? I don't know. Blank page. Yeah. And so the fact that they had come, that they made that movie and then they didn't, they bring in Rian Johnson, who there are things about, The Last Jedi that I don't like, but that thing fucking swings for the fences. That is a movie that has some shit to say, and it makes some statements, and that's really cool. The studio was not ready for that. They had not planned out that setup, and the fans weren't ready for it. Yeah, sorry. You got me talking about Star Wars, so of course I went off the rail. Sorry.
Sure. And like I'm one of those people who came out of A New Hope or out of The Last Jedi feeling optimistic about the course of the series.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
And like this is really cool. They're taking this somewhere else. Also, as someone who has played Star Wars role-playing games for the better part of 2 decades with friends, and doing our own like exploration of Star Wars going other places. And like there was a game that I started with friends when the Fantasy Flight games came out. My friends started running a game where I was like an Order 66 survivor.
Sure.
And my friend was like a Pantoran diplomat turned spy. And we were in an alternate universe in which the Emperor's hands were Luke and Leia Skywalker.
I love it.
And who knows what became of Darth Vader? Nobody knows. But so like exploring other places that Star Wars could go is very much a thing that I get excited about.
Yeah,
And that's why I was so upset by Episode 9, taking all of the things that Episode 8 set up, throwing them away, and immediately trying to stuff The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi into a single movie.
Yeah. It was... It's funny. I came out of... I like you. I came out of The Last Jedi feeling optimistic, being like, okay, first movie of the new trilogy is a return to form, saying, hey, we know what Star Wars is about and where it came from. We've demonstrated that. Second movie, okay, not 100% unalloyed success, but really like bold, a really bold movie. And they're saying, but that carries on from the previous idea. Okay, cool. Now they're going to make Star Wars that has statements. And then before we even got to Rise of Skywalker, my fandom as a Star Wars fan died. I died as a fan. The reaction that I saw to The Last Jedi was so vitriolic and so venomous that I literally was like, I came to the point where I was like, oh, I got it. I'm no longer part of this subculture. This was a thing that I grew up with, that I loved to death. I stuck with this all the way. I was deep into it the whole way through, and this is the moment when I can't call myself a fan anymore. I'm a person who likes Star Wars. I'm still a fan of various versions of it, but as a whole, I no longer am here. And then it felt like that side won. Like the people who I left to avoid, that was the ones that Disney listened to. And then we got Rise of Skywalker, and we all saw how that worked out. So
yeah. Ugh. And so to kind of bring it back to Ava, like if anything, like I'm just trying to imagine if Ava had ended with a version of the end of Evangelion that wasn't a fuck you to those kind of fans.
Yeah.
And so like if Evangelion had just ended with, I've like browsing the Wikipedia about it, there are notes about what a script for the alternate ending of the series could have been. And there was discussion at one point about like there being fucking werewolves and like, and you know, an Ava from the moon.
I'm bought in on that one though.
And like main characters getting turned into werewolves and then fighting, and just like if that's the version we got of the end of the series, I don't think I would be. I don't think I would think of myself as a fan of Evangelion.
Yeah. And you can imagine that one of the reasons why that series is able to develop the way it does is because they brought back Anno. Anno, excuse me. Like the guy who,
he got the rights back and he formed his own studio. Studio Kara, the studio responsible for the movies, is not, Bandai, whoever had the rights.
And you could imagine, I mean, that's not always a good, to let the creator keep working on their original thing for their years isn't always a good, not saying that's always the correct move, but you wouldn't have gotten the version of Evangelion that came out with these remake movies if they had just given it to somebody who, had come up afterwards, and was in reaction to it and it didn't, like it would have been very different, and maybe they wouldn't have understood what to change and how to make it work. It could have come up as a crass commercial, money grab, like it could have been all these other things. It definitely wouldn't have been what you got. And so it's really about like when these projects get made, with few exceptions, like massive, multi-billion-dollar juggernaut kind of productions, most things come from the person who wrote it, or writing being a broad term for the person who tells the story. Sometimes the writer of a movie is the director. Sometimes the writer of a movie is the editor, like
100%.
And every time it's the story that comes out of it is something that comes out of that person. And if it doesn't, it won't sell, it might be brilliant in a really bizarre way, but it won't stick. Like I'm convinced that that's the reason why we don't still talk about Avatar until the most recent movie came out. And I'm of course talking about Avatar with blue people, not Avatar the Last Airbender. Is that story, that was not what Cameron was interested in. He didn't like, I've heard interviews of people talking about him because he apparently had the treatment for that in like 2001. Like he was ready to go with Avatar. And he was excited about the technology. He was excited about the visuals and the world, and he did not care about the story apparently. Or at least that's what I've never heard anybody talking about when they're talking about him in that time when he was first writing it. It's like, oh no, I've got a story and it's about this guy and he's struggling with the fact that he broke his back and blah blah blah, and like it's about what it means to rebuild yourself and like blah blah blah. No, he's like, no man, there's gonna be like blue people and we've got like floating islands and there's like
figured out this really impressive facial capture technology.
Exactly, and like to get my vision, I need to like. The technology needs to catch up to where I am. That's what everybody always talks about. And it's like, oh yeah, that's not a story. You're building a world. You're building a vision, an aesthetic, but you're not building a story.
Yeah. I seem to recall some of the same stuff when like with him talking about Titanic, and Titanic's by no means a bad movie, but like, you hear him talking about the movie and it's about how we built this, replicas of significant parts of the thing, and we have this giant wave tank. And
I don't know if he had. Sometimes those big creators, they've got somebody with them there who's pushing them. I know that as much as he would hate to admit it, George Lucas was like that. He wouldn't have made those movies good if he hadn't had the woman who would end up being his ex-wife. That they were married at the time, Lawrence Kasdan.
Yes.
Even Lee Brackett was helping at that point before she died. As an aside, Lee Brackett is a screenwriter from like the golden age of Hollywood who they brought back for Empire Strikes Back. She was really old at the time and sick. And specifically, they made sure that she stayed on, even though they basically rewrote the movie after she got too sick and tossed just about everything she did. They made sure she stayed on as a credit so that she could retain benefits to cover her medical bills during the time. So she is still listed as like the creator of Boba Fett, for example. I only know this because I got deeply obsessed with Lee Brackett for Breathing Space, because like I referenced one of her movies, and it turns out she wrote like half the movies that I really love. She wrote Big Sleep. She wrote The Long Goodbye. She wrote all three of the Rio Bravo movies. Cameron's the only listed writer for Titanic, but I feel like there had to have been somebody in there.
Yeah, something. Yeah,
something. I guess maybe it's possible. You can make a story that is compelling to people on accident. You know,
true. Yes.
Maybe he just lucked into it, or there was somebody else making the decisions about the actual plot when he wasn't paying attention. I don't know.
Yeah, who can say?
Who can say? I won't make judgments about that. I mean, James Cameron is a good movie maker. He has made really, really good movies. I mean, Aliens is really arguably the best Alien movie to me. The Abyss is good. Terminator 2. I mean, like, even True Lies is fun. Like,
he's not a bad filmmaker by any means.
No. He can be good. I just feel like that wasn't what he was doing with Avatar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've ranged very far over this conversation. All of it was enjoyable. I had a fantastic time. But if people want to find you, they've enjoyed your words and your voice, where could they find you on the internet?
So I have been on a couple of podcasts you may be familiar with, Breathing Space and Devoid of Space, as both writer, director, and as voice actor. So if you're interested in, you can find me in the credits there and listen to the episodes that I was involved in, and also the rest of the series because they're very good. But
I can attest.
But my ego says listen to my episodes.
Oh no, of course. Start with James. Start with James's. They're good.
You can find me on Twitter at GreatBigJames. I mean, I think I have a Tumblr with the same name.
Sure.
That I occasionly look at, but never post anything to.
Audience, definitely go check out. You've got your cosplay stuff on Twitter, right? They could go back through your archive or Instagram.
A lot of my cosplay stuff actually got removed from the internet because someone stole my Instagram account and I didn't re-unlock it in time.
Sucks.
So
so
I should probably put that someplace.
You should.
I still have most of those photos.
Yeah, you should, because your cosplay stuff is fantastic. It's really cool.
Aside from anything else, yes, I have also done some cosplay in the past, and
all right, cool.
Got really into making foam armor for a while. So
hey, man, like making things is another kind of storytelling, man. Like an object is a story in physical form.
Absolutely. When you do it right.
I don't know. Even when you do it wrong, it's just it's just a story of something going wrong. Right?
Sure.
Okay. Well, audience, I will put the links in the description below if you want to find James. And thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. This was a lovely discussion.
Thank you for having me. This was a ton of fun.
All right.
Well, audience, could you tell that both James and I had been recovering from some sort of respiratory ailment each? Sorry for all the sniffling and other noises. Thank you for joining us, though. This was a lovely conversation to have with James. I thank him so much for showing up. If you want to find links to his social media accounts, head on over to the description of this episode. And if you want to support the podcast, why don't you leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Podcatcher, or one of those other sites. Or if you're feeling generous, head on over to patreon.com/cursedknowledge. I don't shill, but I do have bills, as they say. So, this podcast has been a production of the Library of Cursed Knowledge Podcast Network.